All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering a question from the Patreon. Lots of gems, lots of ecological dynamics, and lots of, is your Sifu still using the twit method? What a dinosaur. Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out!
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
Sifu, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
I'm doing well as well.
Here we are for another episode of the Kung Fu Genius.
We are back.
We have a Patreon question from one of our
Yes, we do.
Patrons.
Yes, we do.
And it's a good one. It is one about teaching. So, most of the audience likes it when I, talk about Bruce Lee or controversial stuff or whatever. I can imagine this may be one of those episodes where people don't watch as much because, when it comes down to the actual practice and doing of martial arts, that seems to be a lot less interesting than let's talk shit about these guys who are claiming this thing in history, or let's, talk about
People like
controversial
the
stuff.
controversy.
Yes. So I'll make the thumbnail very controversial. All right. That way people will click. Only to be like, oh, it's about doing martial arts.
Make it Warren Beatty.
That's not interested.
Yeah.
Not interesting at all, right?
Oh, no.
So, all right, Dre, go ahead and read the question.
Let's get it in, man. We got today Nicholas M.
All right.
Our boy.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, Sifu, have you been able to experiment with the methodology currently in vogue in BJJ, known as ecological dynamics?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think a methodology like this could be of interest in our WT class?
Yeah.
Huh.
So this is a great question. And it forced me to look up what the hell ecological.
I have no clue what it is. So I'm curious.
So it's a new trend, I think, in the last couple of years in BJJ.
Yeah.
So of course, when I saw the question, I had to look it up.
Okay.
And here's the part where this whole episode is going to sound like it's super self-serving. I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of how I teach it.
See.
So I mean, not exactly. What's interesting is that sometimes you come up with an idea, and it's maybe called parallel thinking. Like I have an idea that someone else has, but the difference is with those on the BJJ side who promote this method. They gave it a name and they've kind of fleshed it out a little bit. Whereas like for me, it might be like a couple ideas I had about how I think it might be like a better way to teach Wing Chun.
Right.
And then I just started doing it in my own school, but I consider those things like ideas and things that I find helpful in teaching.
Parallel thinking.
And then here it turns out like this is actually a trend in BJJ. So I think the question is, can we apply this to Wing Chun training?
We have.
Which of course I would say, yeah, well, I've already kind of been doing it. Because I did have to look it up, there are some interesting points that, even I didn't have a chance to think about. And I think it'd be very beneficial. And
cool.
This could be something that we could implement into our instructor training, right?
Methodology. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But before we get started, just want to remind everyone that the best way to support the Kung Fu Genius is on Patreon. Patreon.com/The Kung Fu Genius for all your Kung Fu Genius needs. For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to episodes early and all sorts of goodies at higher tiers of support, including special videos, all sorts of cool stuff. And if you don't want to support us on Patreon, you can support us right here on YouTube memberships. And we have a couple little tiers for that. And on the highest tier, you also get some of those videos that we give on Patreon. And if you don't want to support us either on Patreon or on YouTube, you can just straight up give us a donation on PayPal. All that information is in the link below. All right. So let's get to it. The ecological approach. Okay, so I'm going to paraphrase it, and then I printed some notes here from websites, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu websites that actually do teach it, so it's kind of explained a little bit.
Okay,
but let me just
break it down.
Let me give you the rough method of how techniques are taught in Jiu-Jitsu, which is not totally different from how they're taught in Wing Chun, but of course it depends on the school. Some Wing Chun schools don't emphasize sparring or anything like that, so your mileage may vary.
What's interesting, when I practiced back in the day, the JKD stuff, we were doing jiu-jitsu. There was no methodology. It was just straight up rolling.
Right.
You just spar and rolling
Right.
until someone taps out.
Yeah, learn by doing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're throwing you in with the sharks,
Yeah,
right?
that's what they did. Throw them in the fire.
Yeah, and to a certain degree, that is one of the issues with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in general. That, and of course, it depends on the schools.
Mhm.
There are some schools that teach everything in a very step-by-step way,
Mhm.
and then kind of build the student up before they're allowed to spar. And there are other schools where they kind of just throw you into the shark tank right away, and basically you have to figure it out on the job. And when it comes to Wing Chun schools, some Wing Chun schools follow the same kind of idea. So either the instruction is very minimal and you just, okay, you're there only for a couple weeks. They already show you some chi sao real quick and you just start pounding on each other, figuring out how to make this stuff work.
Ah.
Or you just learn a drill kind of quickly and then you go, all right, go ahead. Good luck trying to apply it, right? So the parallels are definitely there, but let me, for people who are in Wing Chun and maybe unfamiliar with how things are traditionally taught in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class,
Right.
usually, okay, and of course, when I say this, my big caveat is they're Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools who will teach it in the exact opposite way of the example I'm about to give. But the example I'm about to give
Of course.
is
Okay.
because everyone's like, well, in my school, actually, and we're not talking about your special snowflake school where they do everything perfectly. We're talking about in general, everyone else, not
Every
you. Okay.
snowflake is perfect.
Yes, exactly. Right. And so, like, usually you go to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class, let's say it's an hour and a half.
Uh-huh.
You spend the first like 10 to 15 minutes doing warm-ups. And the warm-ups could be like running around the mat. We're doing push-ups, doing sit-ups, shrimping, rolling, forward roll, back roll, those kind of things, right?
Got it. Ooh, yeah.
And then after you do, the warm-ups, usually the instructor or professor, as they call it in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, will come out and start, maybe you do like some takedowns and might show a takedown, you work it, or might say, okay, work whatever takedowns with a partner in like a cooperative way.
Mhm.
Then after you've done some takedowns, then the instructor will normally show, okay, here's what we're working on today. And then we'll show some kind of submission or an escape or technique or whatever, right? And then you do it. And if you've ever seen, like, a lot of jujitsu stuff is kind of complicated, especially when you're first learning before you have any idea of like, what the hell am I even trying to do? Because everything is multiple steps.
Okay.
And if you screw up a step, you forget to secure control or you forget to put your weight in the right position before doing the next thing, you
Everything falls apart.
everything falls apart like a
Okay.
cheap suit, right? So it's very like, okay, here's an arm lock, but maybe there are like 6 steps you need to do to secure it, right? And like of those 6 steps, 5 of them are the setup to the arm lock. Only the 6th one is the actual arm lock itself. So you have to secure your position. You got to get your right grips. You got to get the right position. You got to, advance. You have to wait for there to be some kind of reason to do it, and then you go and then you build it up step by step.
What's
right?
amazing is watching like UFC and you see these guys get out of stuff because they know what the guy is trying to set up, which is really cool.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so basically, the coach will come and then we'll show you some submission, and that submission might have a huge number of techniques, like, or I should say, of steps.
Okay.
And imagine, okay, we're not talking about the guy who's been there for 3 years and kind of has an idea and can pick up those things. We're like, you've been there for 2 weeks. And then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you need this grip. You need to secure the control this way. You need to put your leg here. Your weight needs
You're
to be
like,
here. You
huh?
need to do this. You need to do that. And then you're like, ugh. And you see all this, and then the coach demonstrates it maybe a couple times. And then you grab a partner and you drill it. Okay, maybe one time right, one time left, or one time me, one time you, whatever it is, right? And you might be working with someone else who's equally as clueless.
Blind leading the blind.
And there you are, and you're missing all sorts of steps. And it's
Okay.
like, wait, how did that go again? And like, oh, you totally forgot one little transition or whatever.
Okay.
And it can be a little challenging, right? And then after you learn this submission, depending on the school, the instructor may either show another one, okay? And that other one could be entirely unrelated. That always like kind of threw me off when I went to like jujitsu practices, and it'd be like, okay, here's a choke, here's an arm lock, and here's an ankle lock. Like everything is related ultimately, but
Okay.
it's like, but 3 kind of unrelated things as far as a beginner goes, because beginners, like, they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And then it's like you work these 3 drills, and then at some point in the class, after you do drilling, then you do the live rolling. And you fist bump, slap hands, and then you're basically sparring, right? And you could have been there for, in some schools this is your first day, in other schools you don't spar until you've been doing it for a while, but most have some kind of light rolling right away. All right. There are
See.
notable exceptions. The Gracie Academy doesn't let anyone do any free rolling and sparring until they have the blue belt. So the idea is that they have to build up a little arsenal of submissions and escapes and basic things before they're going to start sparring. Because what they said is that sparring in jiu-jitsu is one of the things that discourages people from continuing. Even though, like, for me, I find it's the most fun thing, obviously, right? But for a lot of people, if they're not sure what they're doing and they're just getting smashed by someone else, and they learn 3 techniques today, they can't use either of those 3
they don't know the
techniques.
ABCs yet.
And their partner isn't helping them. Their partner is trying to smash them. Then this is kind of how it's been taught. And this is obviously a problem because what does it do? It basically only promotes the most athletic, talented, strongest people to, smash the junior who's still trying to figure out what they're doing. And the junior that doesn't know what they're doing and maybe lacks confidence is probably the one that needs the jujitsu more than the big strong guy, right?
Okay.
But we have similar parallels in Wing Chun. And you see sometimes like when students start learning Chiu, and then they're paired up with a senior, and that senior is not attuned to like the needs of the junior, and they just start smashing them, or they start using stuff that the junior student hasn't learned to use yet, right? And while that might be very ego gratifying for the senior, it and some juniors may not have a problem. Like, well, some people like getting beat up by the seniors because they go, oh, this is what I will eventually be able to do.
Yeah, I remember I had that thought when Vartan would beat my ass every class.
Yes.
This guy, man.
Right. But then
He's showing me cool stuff.
But then other people take that and they go like, oh, I suck. So the problem is like, you have the identical situation, 2 different students. Student A gets kind of tossed around by a senior, and it's like, whoa, this is so awesome.
This is awesome.
Because they can see the skill. Well, every time I try to attack, they're tying me up, they're pushing me out, they're putting me in a position where I can't strike back. Awesome. And the other person just goes, oh, I can't do any of this, right? So the problem is that when you teach group training, you need to have a method that is the best for the greater number of people, because everyone in the group class, whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Wing Chun, is there perhaps for slightly different reasons. Now, when you teach privately, that's a different story, because when you teach a student privately, if you're a decent instructor or coach, you can get a vibe for what this student wants. And, so when I teach my private students, student A that I have on Monday, wants, at least at the end of class, wants me to toss them around for a few minutes. Okay. I don't do that. Look, they're paying me for a lesson. I'm not going to toss them around for the entire lesson and be like, okay, thanks for your, thanks for coming today. Right.
Like Tom.
Yeah. I'm going to teach them for the majority of the lesson. And then towards the end, we go, okay, let's mix it up a little bit, whether it's Wing Chun versus non-Wing Chun sparring or Wing Chun Chi Sao sparring. Right. And then, give them a little bit of that feeling of being controlled and tossed around and all that good stuff, right? But then like a Tuesday student maybe doesn't want that. They just want techniques, right? And then my Wednesday student just wants to be tossed around for the entire lesson. They just want to feel it. They want to be in the furnace the whole time, right? So when you teach privately, it's easy to make those adjustments to the individuals based on what they want and also why they're taking private lessons, right? Student A might be taking private lessons because they want to get refinement in their program.
All right.
But with a little bit of testing it at the end. Student B might only want the technical stuff because they have a really difficult time getting details. And the moment they start pressuring or putting it under pressure, it might fall apart. So they want to just take it a little slower. And then student C might be happy with their technical progression and might just want to spar for the entire lesson, right?
Okay.
So that's why for private lessons, it's not a problem. You can always tailor the lesson to what that individual needs. But in the group class, that's the challenge because you have people there for different reasons, right? So you need to have a teaching method for the group class that supports the biggest or largest group of people that would be coming to you, right? So that's why that's always been the rub with some Wing Chun schools, especially like kind of trial by fire, swimming with the sharks kind of style of Wing Chun teaching. And then same thing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which for the most part was that swimming with sharks kind of way. Here's a couple submissions. Okay, now we're going to spar. Good luck. And then you're off, right?
Oh,
So,
goodness.
and that was, challenging for some students who, who maybe need
Lack
a little bit more of a structure, right?
coordination.
So now, let me read a little bit about what this
Please.
so-called
Please do.
ecological dynamics is, right? So this I got off of a website. I totally apologize. I don't. It's from a it's from Dr. Rob Gray. So I suppose he's a Brazilian. I think he's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu coach as well.
Okay.
So this is from some website where I googled ecological dynamics BJJ, and this was like one of the first articles that
Shout
came
out
up.
to Dr. Gray.
And then so they're talking about there's an evolving body of psychology offering a better way to teach athletes, right? And I know sometimes when you use the word athlete, traditional martial artists are like, I'm not an athlete. I don't do sport. I am a martial artist. Okay.
I'm an artist.
So anytime you hear the word athlete, all right, before you get offended and your panties get fully in a twist, just in your head canon, change that nasty word of athlete to martial artist. All right. Okay. So if you've ever gotten frustrated with your struggles to learn jujitsu, maybe it's not you, maybe it's your coach. Obviously, wherever I use jujitsu, you could replace that with Wing Chun, right?
All right.
Many coaches coach based on tradition, right? And we know this certainly is the case in Wing Chun.
So many people are confused about basics in Wing Chun Chi-Sao. Some view it as a collection of moves, and masters confuse their own students by talking of principles and concepts without telling them what's what. The 15 Chi-Sao Fundamentals is my attempt at explaining Wing Chun Chi-Sao from a perspective of principles, but also with the basic techniques required to express those principles. It shows the framework for Hong Kong Wing Chun Chi-Sao, in particular, the training of Pun Sao and Lap Da. This is necessary training before going on to the higher and more spontaneous expressions of Chi-Sao. Right now, if you use the code KFG Chi-Sao, you can get a signed copy of my book for the price of the unsigned one. Click on the link in the description below and use the code KFG Chi-Sao at checkout to get a signed copy of this full-color, over 230-page manual on the vital foundational training exercise of Wing Chun. This offer is good while supplies last, so get yours today.
They coach the way their coaches coached them. All right. For the most part, how do people teach? They teach the same way they learn, right? Some coaches, I think I'm in that category, always tried to teach things in a better way than I had learned it. But some other coaches don't really spend that much time thinking about how to teach. So they just they run the same program. You know what I mean?
See.
That they learn. But tradition doesn't always align with evidence. This is certainly true in Wing Chun. And there's an emerging body of evidence that your coaches are doing it wrong. Okay. So by doing it wrong, we're talking about the typical, okay, here's a technique, multi-parts. Here's another technique, multi-parts. Here's another technique, multi-parts. All right, good luck. Go ahead and try that in sparring, right? Because now, whenever you're sparring, whether it's Chi-Sao sparring, Gao-Sao, or Wing Chun versus non-Wing Chun sparring, or in this case, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rolling, well, now there's an element of resistance and tension and competitiveness, right? You're trying to get me, I'm trying to get you, right? So when you're under that kind of stress, oftentimes, especially when you're new to that environment, you go into what's called amygdala hijack, which is part of your brain that kind of freezes up, and it doesn't allow you necessarily to use the logic thinking part of your brain.
Why is it called amygdala?
Well, because it's your amygdala that is getting hijacked in this moment,
That's what
right?
shuts down.
Yeah, so it's like, you have fight or flight,
Mhm.
and you have like Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. You have two systems of how your brain engages with stuff. You have system one, which is like the quick snap decision version of your brain, right? You're riding your bike down the street and suddenly you see a pothole and you just swerve out of it, right? That's system one, quick, natural reaction. System two is when you stop and you deliberate about something. You're thinking about the pros and cons about whether to go here or there, or should I eat this or should I eat that? That's system two, the slow thinking. Now, your brain is kind of lazy because it takes a lot of energy to think, a lot of sugar, a lot of as we joke, you're burning mental calories, right? So oftentimes your brain tries to solve stuff with system one. Can we make a snap decision and get on with it, right? And for many things, system one is perfect. Swerving out of the way of, if something's coming at you, you don't need a committee in your head deciding whether to move out of the way. You just move out of the way, right? When someone says something that you just deserves a quick, simple answer, like, hey, did you eat today? You don't have to you just, it's the quick answer, right? That's
All right.
system one. But system one can also be problematic. For example, you read a comment on your YouTube that you don't like,
Oh.
and you go like this.
Yeah.
That's amygdala hijack, by the way.
Huh.
And then before slipping into system two, which is, should I comment? What should I write? You just immediately go back like, well, F you too. That's all system one. Okay, right? And so
okay.
there are times when you have to take a breath,
Okay.
use system two, and then you decide, yeah, I don't even need to answer this comment.
Right.
But when we get into those moments like amygdala hijack, that kind of fight or flight syndrome, we do things in system one that we shouldn't, right? Well, now if we come back to teaching, I just taught you, in the case of Wing Chun, let's say I just taught you a new way of using tanda, all right, in infighting as opposed to in distance, right?
Okay.
And we trained it in Chiu-A, we trained it in a drill, and now we go, all right, now let's spar with the assumption that you're going to try to integrate this technique into the sparring. And now your partner's coming at you full force, full speed. You're in amygdala hijack and you're trying to do something that requires at first, because it's not natural yet, some deliberate motions to be able to do it, right? When your body has this movement down perfectly, then you can go back to doing it in a system one, but you're not there yet.
I
So
see.
when you just learned a series of techniques that have a bunch of steps that you haven't, that they're not in the bone yet, they're not integrated into the way you move, certain transitions in Chi-Sao or whatever, case of jiu-jitsu, submission, case of Wing Chun, usually some kind of hand techniques or leg
Yeah.
maneuver or something like that, right? You're in amygdala hijack and that fight or flight syndrome because now you're sparring with someone coming at you and you're expected in that moment to integrate something that's not part of your arsenal yet.
Fascinating.
And so this is a problem in Wing Chun, and it's sure as hell a problem in jiu-jitsu where you have techniques that are very contextual, just like in Wing Chun, but also require multiple steps to set up.
So essentially, our training is to hack the amygdala hijack.
Well,
somewhat,
to train a
much.
new technique with so many reps
Mhm.
that you are that it becomes a natural way of how you move, and the only way to do that is to stay short of that getting
Yeah.
into fight or flight. You know what I mean? So the idea that sometimes Wing Chun bros like, yeah, well, if you're not always fighting full contact, and if you leave Wing Chun training and you don't have a fat lip and a black eye, did you really even have Wing Chun
You
training? It's like,
train-
well,
you
I
didn't
mean,
train at all.
the problem is that, look, they're the guys who have no contact. Okay. The very traditional Wing Chun guys who are just doing everything like this and not really hitting each other and just doing drills and doing everything traditional and correct. And then you got the other Wing Chun guys that don't do any drilling and step-by-step stuff, and they're just punching the shit out of each other. Okay. And the problem is that whenever you try to discuss what's the best method to teach, the loudest voices are the people on both ends.
Ah.
Well, no, you have to do everything slowly over the course of 80,000 years. And then if you just do it like this, super slow every time for 80,000 years, well, that one day when someone does finally attack you, 80,000 years from now, you'll have that technique down, right? And then the other side is like, yo, bro, if you can't do it full power, the moment you learn it, you can't do it,
Yeah.
right? And so the problem is that when it comes to these arguments, it's always the opposite extremes that are the most vocal. Okay.
Wow.
It's just like, average person should have a healthy relationship to food. Okay.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have a healthy relationship with food? People who have an eating disorder or who are completely overweight. The opposite ends of the spectrum. And when we talk about how we should eat, we're normally arguing them from either two ends of the extreme and not discussing a middle of the road kind of logical, sane way for most people to do it, right? So when
I
it comes
see.
to teaching methods,
Yeah.
just doing soft, controlled, easy technique forever. And I'm a huge proponent of learning techniques step by step. But at some point, you got to then go to the next. You got to then bring it to the
Yeah.
next phase, right?
Yeah.
But then also we do everything by, punching and beating the shit out of each other. We don't do technique drilling or whatever. That's for a bunch of wussies, right? That's also, I mean, the problem is like people need to stop having this binary thinking when it comes to how to teach. it's not having a completely conservative, intensity-free drilling of the technique done perfectly soft and everything. And it's not just put the gloves on and punch you in the face, bro. All right. Why
Yeah.
do those have to be the only? We're thinking human beings. There's nuance. We can go somewhere in
You're
between. Right?
bleeding, bro. You didn't use your Wing Chun.
That's right, bro.
Yeah.
Your bonk cell's no good. I hit you.
Wipe your nose, man.
Yeah. So, what Dr. Rob Gray here talks about, like the old way of teaching, all right? Which, by the way, we still use this. I teach this in our basic leadership training for assistant trainers, which is entry level when you start teaching. We do teach this standard method as the standard way that we teach, but that's also because beginners, brand new beginners, aren't sparring or mixing up as many elements as they will once they're intermediate and advanced. And in those levels, we can change the paradigm a little bit. So he calls it the twit method, as he says this is the common way it's taught. So twit is obviously a negative word. So he's saying this is wrong. The T is for tell the athlete what to do. All right. And remember, guys, you can use martial artist instead of athlete if you're offended by the word athlete.
Switch it in your brain.
Yeah. So T, tell the athlete.
Don't
Tell
let
the
it-
martial artist what to do. W is watch them try to do it. All right. This is from the instructor's perspective. The I is inform them what they did wrong. Okay.
Mm.
And then the last T is tell them again.
This is twit.
Yeah. This is
Okay.
the twit, right? And you know that this is basically how things are taught. You tell them to do something, then you watch them do it. They do it wrong. And then you like tell them and correct them. And then you go back and then you watch them continually make the same mistake.
God, I'm going to have to get a thesaurus and see if I can find a word that means inform but begins with an A.
Of course. I knew when he started. He wanted to make it the
I know.
the other method.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, which is funny because also that TWAT in from his neck of the woods is also another one of those words like see you next Tuesday, which is like more common.
Yeah.
All right. But like in
Goodness.
America, those are like a little more offensive, but in where he comes from, it's a term of endearment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I recently had to teach my daughter that the other day because my eldest, she asked me about the C word. And then I'm like, yeah.
What's C?
Yeah,
See
like
you
I
next
explained
Tuesday mean?
I explained to her what it means. I explained to her that in America it's a very high level curse. But where he comes from, it's a term of endearment.
Right.
so
She
just
must
so
have
she
loved that.
knows, it's like, things are different in other
I want to
places,
go to
right?
London, Dad.
Yeah, just to say that, right? So
Say it
anyway,
all over.
and that is the basic method, which is tell them what to do, watch them do it, all right? Show them what they're doing wrong, and then go back and watch them continue to do it wrong.
The I is inform them.
Inform them what
Okay.
they did wrong,
Got
right?
it.
Now,
God,
so we
no.
use and so that's kind of a very standard way of teaching, and you would see like that's basically how most people teach stuff, right? So for our entry level teaching at City Wing Chun, we use something called the DPM method, which is the demonstration performance method.
Okay.
So what we do is we don't just tell the student what to do, we also demonstrate. Okay. So that way you hit both visual and like kinesthetic learners who need to like do it, or they need to understand what they're trying to do and not just see the move, right?
Okay.
So, you say like, okay, today we're working on bong sao against a low pinning punch, right? So when someone gives you this type of punch, you can't go forward. So you have to yield and give way. So you give a verbal explanation. Why, like, what's the problem? The person's punching with a low pinning elbow. What's this, why is that a problem? Because it restricts my arm from going forward. How do we solve it? Well, we're going to yield by lifting our elbow up. And if there's enough force, turn out of the way and then go back to our normal striking program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you demonstrate it. Then you have a student come and do it a few times. You step 1, step 2, and then I always like to like show the problem, then show the solution again with some explanation. And then the last one, show it at full speed so that they know what they're doing. But then they also see, oh, this is at the end. It's not supposed to be done slowly. It's supposed to be done at speed, right? Or
Okay.
whatever the tempo of the exercise is, right? And then that's the demonstration part where you verbalize and demonstrate. And then the performance method is the students perform it. So you let them train with their partner, and in order to improve this, so I think one of the reasons why, although we don't necessarily use the TWIT method exactly, but we use a similar framework, but with a couple caveats. One is that we promote a really good training partner culture at City Wing Chun.
Yes.
So
Love
the
it.
students understand that especially when they're drilling, that this is a cooperative thing. You don't win the exercise by ruining it for the other guy unless we're trying to do that in sparring. But if we're in the technical, like, let's get this thing right, and you're being that guy who's doing everything else to mess up the exercise, then you're the asshole. Like then it's like, so that culture doesn't like exist. We're drilling, we're learning a technique. The time to resist or to introduce variables or difficulties is when we start sparring or we start adding the resistance, right?
Okay.
But the time to not add pressure and resistance and do other variables is when the student is on their third rep learning the movement for the first time. So that's why, like, the issues with the TWIT method partially can be solved by having a good training partner culture. Also, I have to emphasize the difference between jiu-jitsu and Wing Chun is that, for example, although simultaneous actions, pak sao punch, tan sao punch, can be a little tricky for beginners, it's still not to the level of, okay, you got to make your grips here. Now you got to secure this grip here. Then you got to move your posture here. Now you got to hold the head. You got to move this way. You got to swing your leg around, pinch the knee. Like the jiu-jitsu techniques, to be fair to both Wing Chun and jiu-jitsu, have a lot more steps. Okay. So that's why I think that the reason why the basic method of kind of demonstrating and having them do it is problematic in jiu-jitsu is because there are so many damn steps. And for a beginner, that can be very daunting. For Wing Chun students, there are a lot less steps, even though some things can be a little bit more coordination intensive than others, but we can still get away with it. And when the students are in the second phase, they're performing it. The instructor should go by and correct. But where I disagree with the TWIT method is, the I is inform them what they did wrong. So that's where we don't do that. Because when the students are performing, what we do is I'll go by and I'll often tell them what they're doing correct. Mm-hmm. All right, like, good. Hey, you're closing the gap. Really, really good job. Now let's try to maybe angle off to the side a little bit. So when you want to correct them, it's, as an instructor, it's usually a good idea to start with something positive.
Yeah.
Hey, you're doing it much better than yesterday, right? Or, hey, remember when you struggled with this when we first started doing it? Now you're starting to get it.
Yeah.
And then you just go, okay, now I just want you to angle a little bit more off to the side to stay a little further away from the rear hand. Boom. So then you smuggle in a very simple correction after you give them something positive. All right? Now, sometimes they're brand new students or people who are so highly uncoordinated, you struggle to find that positive thing to say, right?
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. I would urge the instructor still try to find something positive to say.
It has to be.
And that
something.
positive thing might even be like, yeah, this is like a very challenging thing to learn. Hey. I struggled with it when I started learning.
Yeah, you woke up today. You're here now.
That sounds condescending. All right. Okay. But what I would say, like, sometimes you say, hey, this is like a very difficult thing to do. Even I struggled with it. Like, sometimes you may need to frame it that way. Right.
All right.
So it should be framed positively. And when it comes to the correction, when you tell them what they're doing wrong, you can tell them what they're doing wrong, but that's kind of negatively phrased. Or instead of telling them what they did wrong, tell them what they need to do to make it right. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So that we're not dealing in the world of negatives. Because if I tell you, whatever I tell you, you're going to think of, right? Pink elephant.
No.
Finish.
Oh, man.
Okay. But now if I told you, don't think of a pink elephant, you still think of a pink elephant. Because the brain doesn't understand. A negation.
Delirium.
A negation is a kind of a man-made concept. It's not, your brain only understands what is. It doesn't understand what is not, because what is not, it
still
is not, right? You know what I mean? Like, so that's why if you want a student to hear what you're saying, you don't say, hey, your elbow is out. Because in their mind, they hear, oh, my elbow's out. So you're reinforcing that. You say, all right, cool. See right here, I want you to bring your elbow more in. You tell them what to do. Like, oh, no, your elbow's out. No good. I need your elbow to come in a little bit more over here.
Right.
So that's why even when you're using a very simple demonstration, performance, correction method of teaching, phrase the corrections positively. It changes the whole outlook because you're not telling them what they did wrong, which always has an implied value judgment. It's not that my elbow's out. It's that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
All right. But when you say, hey, bring your elbow in more, there's no emotional connection to that. because it's the elbow that needs to come in more. It's not you that is making the mistake. It's this is what you're supposed to do, right? So anyway, I would say like we can even improve his so-called twit method by one, all right, making sure that when you demonstrate, you also explain clearly and demonstrate. When the students perform it, you give them positively enforced correction, not just, oh, you did this wrong. Okay. And then, you have to still kind of gently reinforce it. So I would say that's how you can improve the model. But also in Wing Chun, like I said, we're not dealing with things that are necessarily as complicated until later when we get into Chiu and you defend this. And if he makes this mistake, you go here. It can get a little bit more technical when we start getting into like Chiu attacks and defenses. And if I do this, then this, then this, then this, right? So, but anyway, we still haven't discussed the ecological method. All right.
We're getting there.
So we just first discussed how it's normally taught. All right. And like I said, I still use a version of that method, but maybe a slightly more updated version. Okay. So now he says, so we're talking about something called ecological dynamics, which comes from the emergent field of ecological psychology, the study of how your mind and body perform in a realistic environment. In our sport, for this article, he's talking about BJJ. The most relevant piece of ecological psychology is this: athletes or martial artists can't just repeat things that their coach showed them. This is because no technique truly occurs the same way twice. There are just too many variables in motion. All right. Think about it. Even something like a paksao. If I'm at distance coming in with a paksao, it's different than if I'm already close. It's different if I'm doing a paksao from Chi-sao, from Lat-sao, from the outside, when my partner's turned, when my partner's square, in a Wing Chun position, in a non-Wing Chun position, right? So that's why context is always king, right? And that's why sometimes that's also, by the way, part of the reason here why when you do teach techniques, especially to beginners, you have to be very specific about the setups. You don't just go, okay, give your partner a paksao. You're going to say, okay, the bad guy, the trainer, is going to stand like this in a non-Wing Chun guard with the right lead. You're going to have your left hand. So like the more junior they are, the more specific you have to be because they don't have the experience to figure out how to do that from multiple positions yet, right? So that's exactly what he's talking about here, right? But we still don't have the solution yet, right? So we're getting to it, all right? And then when I start reading it, I want you to tell me if it's familiar, all right? So then he says, so as a coach, your goal is to not give your athletes the instructions. It is to help their body develop adaptability and figure out the solution on the fly. All right. Which, first of all, sounds a lot like what we're trying to do in Wing Chun. But truthfully, any martial art that emphasizes adaptation is going to have something like learning how to do things on the fly. Right.
Yeah.
So here is kind of how they do it. All right. So for starters, they recommend that one, you abandon the twit method. All right. So he's talking to coaches here. All right. Although I would say if you do it the DPM way that we do it, you can still use it. Right. Stop giving your students instructions and have them play games instead. We'll get back to this one in a moment. Use constraints to guide learning in the right direction. Keep the games fun. Students should succeed 70% of the time. Right. Shake it up. Introduce variability and unpredictability. All right. So already there we have 5 points, right? And when I read that, I was like, oh man, that sounds a lot like our sparring add-ons method.
Yes.
Okay. Because so for example, what I do for the beginning students, all right, as you know, when when beginners first start out in Wing Chun, we prioritize, okay, they got to learn how to defend basic strikes coming at them, right? Okay. A lot of traditional Wing Chun schools from the beginning, they get into the weeds of, okay, Pakda versus Pakda, and I do Lapda, you do this, and I do Pakda, and you do this, and I do this. They get into the weeds with a lot of Wing Chun combinations, and a lot of it is very Wing Chun on Wing Chun thinking, all right? And this was definitely the old way. The problem is that you are not going to fight another Wing Chun person. You're not going to fight someone with their hands in a narrow Zhong Sao. You're not going to fight someone who's going to give you a Pax punch or a Fox Sao punch or whatever, right? Yeah, and look, if you're on the street and you get into it with some dude,
Yeah.
and that dude pulls up a Wing Chun Jongso, and you pick up a Wing Chun Jongso, be like, hey, you do Wing Chun too?
Yeah.
And slap high five and go have a beer together, right? What are you doing
please.
fighting
Yeah.
together, right?
No.
Okay. So the problem is that starting with Wing Chun on Wing Chun, I think, is problematic because it gives the student the wrong idea. They think they're going to be facing people with squared up body positions and their hands in front of their chest, right? And doing low line kicks and chain punches, right? And this is problematic. So at City Wing Chun, what we do is the quote unquote sparring, which is still controlled for the beginners, is your Wing Chun as the trainee and the other guy's not. Okay.
There you go.
So we have to teach our beginners how to attack, like not like a high level kickboxer or a high level jujitsu guy, but like the kind of attacks you're going to have on the street. Wild swings, stray punches, low punches, someone trying to grab your arms, put you in a headlock, stuff you for a tackle, smother you when you're trying to chain punch them, or run away from you as you come in and try to chain punch, right? If you're not learning these behaviors and you're just doing Wing Chun versus Wing Chun, which assumes that the other guy's a Wing Chun guy, the other person wants to stick to you, the other person has a react. You look on the street, people, you try to stick to someone's arms, they just pull it away and try to hit you, right? And if you don't train with that as a potential, and just, if I stick to you, you stick to me because we're Wing Chun people, that's a problem. That's why one of my issues with Wing Chun's current trend of going way into this internal stuff is that it presupposes, in my opinion, too much an opponent that wants to stick with you. Whereas the average person who doesn't know anything, you start sticking in their, they're going to try to pull their arms away. And yes, I know if you have good Chiu and good internal skills and feeling, you can make them stick. I get that whole argument. But
go forward.
But the problem is, while one of the arguments against jujitsu in the old days was like, yeah, well, because jujitsu people used to say 90% of all fights end up on the ground, right? So that's why you got to learn how to fight. This is 1990s jujitsu advertising, right? And when they were still trying to get more stand-up styles to do jujitsu, well, 90% of all fights end up on the ground, right? And then what was the counter from the traditional guys? 100% of all fights start standing up, all right? Which I'd be like, well, not all the time. Sure, people get attacked while they're sitting down, right? But 87% of statistics are made up on the spot anyway. But the idea was but we start standing up, so you have to make sure that you also know how to do stand up, right? And for me, it's the same problem with Wing Chun Chiu. Yeah, if I have contact, I can stick, I can feel, I can do certain things. So a certain percentage of fights, have some kind of contact with your arms and your opponent's arms, maybe. But all of those fights start without contact. Okay. So what I find is that this extreme, let's just stick and get in the weeds of feeling and rooting and pushing and all this kind of stuff, it presupposes too many things that in combat is just not the case. Your opponent who's standing in front of you, who just wants to belt you in the face with their fist, is under no illusion of trying to hold on to your arms or even grab you or even block you with their arms. They're just going to find openings and try to piece you up. So if you cannot protect yourself, you cannot smother, you cannot close the gap without getting hit, you don't know how to position yourself away, and you presuppose that somehow that guy wants to stick to you, then you're in for a big surprise. So for our beginners, we have your Wing Chun and the other guy's not. So the other guy's coming in with all the types of attacks. Now what we do is and this is exactly why when I saw this, I'm like, oh, this is basically the method we've been using forever. And so the idea of having them play like a little bit of a game. Yeah. So this is something that I often do, especially when we do sparring. So sometimes I'll tell the students, let's say Chiu sparring Gosa, okay? I'll say, okay, sometimes I'll just say, okay, just do Chiu sparring and go at it, right? So I'll give no particular instruction, right? Yeah. And that's just okay, let's really try it, right? But I prefer to do sparring with some kind of parameters, because then I find you make more progress in there when there's a goal, rather than the goal is I just need to beat you because we're being competitive. But there's a specific conceptual or technical or positional outcome that you want from each exchange. Yes. And so I'll sometimes do something like, okay, let's do some Gosa, Wing Chun versus Wing Chun sparring. And so you guys are going to start from Punsao. Either one can attack. And I want you guys to handle the first few exchanges more like flow, attack and defense. I attack you, you defend. Everyone is kind of moving with each other, right? And then at random,
breakaway.
Partner B, for example, but in this example, partner B is suddenly going to go berserk and start pressing you and doing stuff that's like not typical of Chiu. So you're sticking, and suddenly they just start barreling through you with elbows out, with stuff that kind of would happen on the street. And then you have to apply this technique that we just worked on today.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that is a very typical way of how I teach things, right? So I'll say like if we worked on a technique, let's say kamnasao, right? Kamnasao is an arm throw when you're being pushed. All right, we do it in the technical drill a bunch of times in the drill portion of the class. And then in sparring, I'm like, all right, go ahead, start Chiu sparring. And then at random, you have a trainer and a trainee. The trainer will just randomly, when you don't expect it, just start bursting through you with, arms out and just, kind of trying to like destroy your Chiu, right? But people are like, oh, you're doing Chiu wrong, so I can't do it. Well, if your Chiu doesn't work against wrong Chiu, what the hell is it for? All right. And then suddenly that technique that we learned earlier today, we have to apply that in sparring, but just that one technique, not 5 different things. So then the first few times a student gets overwhelmed, they're like, oh shit, and they couldn't do it. But they know in that moment that this thing is happening, that's the trigger for them to do this. In this case, let's say a kamnasao arm throw, right? So after a couple times of getting kind of smothered by their partner's arm, they start to put that one in and put that one in. And then what they're doing is they're doing Chiu sparring with all the different variables, but with an emphasis. That's where you're talking about constraints.
I see.
Okay, so like, yeah, we're going to do sparring and flow, but
not some hand ties.
No. But the trainer is going to specifically change the tempo, change the way it's being done by, shooting the arm out and then, bursting in suddenly, right? And then you got to apply this technique. And then what that does is that's what they mean by ecological dynamics, right? Because now you're seeing that technique in a type of situation that's going to happen, right? Your opponent is not going to give you a narrow indoor pak punch, which, you have your Wu-sao, Tok-sao setup, which perfectly converts into this arm throw that you're going to take them, right? You're going to be sticking with someone's arms, and this guy's going to suddenly just try to, barrel through you with the arm lock down. It's going to push you back where you can't turn. And then you're going to catch the arm, and then that's when you do it, and that's how you learn it, right? And so when I saw this, I'm like, oh, this is just the technical academic mumbo jumbo to what I've been kind of figuring out, right? Because then we're talking about gamifying it.
So many people are confused about basics in Wing Chun Chiu. Some view it as a collection of moves, and masters confuse their own students by talking of principles and concepts without telling them what's what. The 15 Chiu Fundamentals is my attempt at explaining Wing Chun Chiu from a perspective of principles, but also with the basic techniques required to express those principles. It shows the framework for Hong Kong Wing Chun Chiu, in particular, the training of Pun Sao and Lap Da. This is necessary training before going on to the higher and more spontaneous expressions of Chiu. Right now, if you use the code KFG Chiu, you can get a signed copy of my book for the price of the unsigned one. Click on the link in the description below and use the code KFG Chiu at checkout to get a signed copy of this full-color, over 230-page manual on the vital foundational training exercise of Wing Chun. This offer is good while supplies last, so get yours today.
So if we talk about Chiu sparring, we do it like in the way I just described. Okay, we're going to do Chiu sparring, but partner B, the trainer, is going to at random introduce this element. And at that moment, that's when you do it, right? At random, right? So that we introduce what he talks about. He also says, shake it up, introduce variability and unpredictability, right? Yeah. And that can be done by, introducing this thing. And when the student gets better at the skill, then that unpredictability and variability is, okay, now we put two different things your partner can do. So because you're already adapting in real time when you're doing Chiu sparring. Yes. I mean, like when you're doing Chiu sparring, you're also adapting to whatever your partner's doing there. So it's not just about the drill. You're also like reacting to what the hell's going on, right?
Okay.
But then your partner can at random, for example, barge in with the elbow up, and then you need to do the kamnasao throw. But your partner could also at random go for a tackle in the middle of Chiu, and you have to do your tackle defense. Yeah. So now you're suddenly dealing with a barging opponent with like a wide arm or someone who changes levels. Two very realistic scenarios in fighting.
Yeah.
All right. But now put in there at random. All right. And of course, these are just 2 examples. You could have in the middle of Chiu, partner A, partner B just, pushes the guy, separates, and tries to go for a swing, right? Or
Okay.
pushes the guy, separates, tries to go for a kick. Like the variable, I mean, I'm not saying that the specific examples I gave are the only ones. I'm saying just you have a format, Chiu sparring or Wing Chun versus non-Wing Chun sparring.
We add
And
the
then you
add-ons.
introduce add-ons or variables or whatever that the trainer then does at random. As the student or the trainee gets better, you can then add more things happening at random. So with your senior students, the trainer can add everything in the kitchen sink at some point when they
Right.
have the skills to do it, right? Although with something new, with a new skill, you usually just limit it to one or two. But with the old skills, the stuff you've been doing for years, then you can mix up all those things, right?
Yes.
And so that's how kind of you kind of build it up bit by bit that way there, right? So that's what I mean, what he means, I think, by games. And also like when we do Wing Chun versus non-Wing Chun sparring, for the beginners, we have 5 add-ons, all right, which is things that the bad guy can do. What are the kind of things that happen on the street? Well, if you go in and try to punch someone, the guy can try to run away from you. All right, we call that the runner or the Wong Jack Man, right? But
Oh
then,
no.
so some people, when they get hit, they back away and they run away. And then
Mm.
you have to stay and chase and stay on them, right? But sometimes people do the opposite. They get punched and they get pissed and they barge
Yeah.
forward. They just step through you with no respect for your punches or whatever. And we call that the presser.
The presser.
All right. So then you have to convert your chain punches very quickly to elbow strikes, and you have to be able to move offline or whatever,
Uh-huh.
because he's going to crush your chain punches if
Or,
he's like that.
or the honey badger.
Exactly, right?
Honey badger mentality.
And then the third one we have is, okay, someone can just, grab your arms. All
Mhm.
right. Like you're chain punching, they just grab your forearms and try to hold you from chain punching. So you need to be able to, we call that one the chain punch stopper, right? So then we have a special way to deal with that. Other common thing that happens in street fights is headlock. All right. The guy gets
Mhm.
hit a couple times and goes to put you in a headlock. All right. So you need to have really, really solid headlock defense, right? And then the final one is the guy changes levels and tries to do some kind of tackle. We're not talking about like a high level single leg into a high crotch into, grapevining a supporting
Please.
leg or whatever,
Please.
or blast double take. We're talking about just like a basic frat boy. I'm
Yeah.
gonna try to take you down, bro. All right?
Yeah.
So for the beginners, they need to learn how to fight against these 5 very common things: the runner, the presser, the chain punch stopper, the headlocker, and the tackler, right? So then what do we do for beginners? Okay, so they learn in one lesson, they learn like a punch defense, okay? So the guy comes at you with a straight punch, you do, your wedge or your side palm, whatever it is, right? You go in, you start doing chain punching, all right? So they learn the basic technique and they do that super slow and super clean. And then maybe in the first lesson, we go, okay, so now when your partner gives you the punch, after you defend it, they're going to try to run away from you, because after you hit them, they're going to try to back away and get space. So your job is to step and press and make sure that they don't get any space, because if they get space, they're going to hit you at the
No
end of the
space for
shots,
you.
right? So that then we have the runner, all right? So like lesson 1, the student learned a punch defense, and then when the guy starts running away, the student chases him with chain punch. Okay, they learn the runner. Then maybe lesson 2, we go, okay, well, sometimes when you hit people, they press in. So we have to create a frame with the lance out. We have to do the elbow strikes. We have to move offline. So that day they're going to do maybe the same punch defense.
Yeah.
But now after their partner fires the punch, they cover up and start pressing them. And now you got to do this one. Okay. And then maybe lesson 3, we do the chain punch stopper. Okay.
Right.
And then lesson 4, they're doing the same straight punch defense, but now their partner can run, press, or grab their punches.
There you go.
Right. So even though we're starting to build up the skill, it's still done cooperatively, but now, just like he talked about in here, there's a situation of variability and unpredictability. So you know that there's a punch coming at you because you're still a beginner, you want to do the correct punch defense, but you don't know, is he now going to run, press, or grab my arms? All
There you
right.
go.
And because you train those techniques individually, when it happens, even if you freeze, you're like, oh, all right, this is the chain punch stop.
Unpredictability.
And that's how you start learning it, right? Then, then eventually the student learns the headlock defense, learns the tackle defense. And when they have all 5 add-ons, then any sparring drill we do against any punch or any kick attack. So the trainer fires a straight punch, a swing, a low punch, a wild overhead, a roundhouse kick, a straight, whatever the attacker opens with,
Yeah.
the trainer, the bad guy, or the attacker in this case, will then use one of the 5 add-ons as a follow-up. So we'll fire that wide swing and then run away. And maybe the next one fire the wide swing and go for the arms, right? And maybe the next one fire a low punch and go for a headlock, right? Or fire a back fist and go for a tackle, right? And then they can even start to mix it up a little bit, right? Fire a punch, start running away, and then start pressing. and then change
Yeah,
levels,
okay.
right? So now what the student is doing is that within these 5 different variables, which they're becoming more and more familiar with because we do it every class, we are now mixing them so that they don't know which one it is. And then what you notice, and this is one of the things I'm most proud of when you watch beginners sparring, like doing the basic sparring drills at City Wing Chun, even if they've been there just for like 4 months,
Hmm.
you know, so they're still like, you know, they're still a little, you know, not quite like smooth or whatever, right? But you see they stand there, a punch comes at them, they close the gap, and then their partner, who's training cooperatively, but also trying to challenge them, is doing the types of things that happen on the street, is
Yeah.
running, pressing, grabbing the arms. And then what you start to notice is the students are able to mix in all these skills. The runner, the presser, guy grabs the arms, goes for a headlock, and they can like go from one to the next, one to the next. And
Love it.
before they've learned Chiu, before they've learned any kind of contact flow or whatever, they can already adjust between these different variables that would happen in a real fight in a safe way, but kind of stacking it this way here. And once they have the 5 add-ons, those 5 add-ons are added to any of the sparring exercises. And hell, even later in Chiu, although we sometimes do Chiu-based add-ons, but we can even say, okay, today in Chiu, suddenly in the middle of Chiu, your partner tries to run or press or do that. So we can use the sparring add-ons in Chiu sparring, not
Yeah.
just Chiu-based things. Now, if all the Wing Chun was taught as Wing Chun versus Wing Chun, well, and you just learn Pak Da versus the Zhong Sao, and you learn all this like in the very conservative
Pop
way, right?
versus pop.
Well, the person who's attacking you is not going to run away because that's not a Wing Chun thing. You would just turn. They're not going to put up their arms and try to barge right through you because that's what happens on the street. That's not what a Wing Chun person does. They're not going to put you in a headlock. It's not a Wing Chun technique. They're not going to grab both of your arms like this because that's bad Wing Chun. Then they're certainly not going to go for a tackle. So if you're just training Wing Chun versus other Wing Chun, then you're not training any of the stuff that's going to happen. Right? So in my school, like our students don't focus on 2 people in Zhong Sao doing a pack punch versus each other at the beginning stages. I would much rather the Wing Chun student is in the Zhong Sao and the other guy's standing like this, which is, you know, with their arms up in a non-Wing Chun position because that's what they're going to see. Once the students start getting into Chiu and Chiu sparring, that's where you have all the Wing Chun on Wing Chun stuff, where you
go.
can teach all the Zhong Sao versus Zhong Sao and you know, Pak Da, Fok Da, all the different Let Sao attacks and everything like that. Like, you don't need to do that at first. You can do that in the intermediate levels very easily. Prep the students against the things that are going to happen out on the street,
There you
not
go.
against a hypothetical Wing Chun on Wing Chun situation that's not going to help them develop the skills. So we do kind of gamify it with the add-ons or with putting in certain parameters.
Yes.
And then sometimes using constraints. So, you know, you want a student to learn a certain tactic, okay? So, for example, if we are doing, if we're fighting and we're in close range and my partner tries to kick me, okay? Then once I'm in range, okay, I would not try to lift my leg to defend the kick at that close range. It's too close.
Too close.
You know, you're already on top of them. You can see the whites of their eyes. They give you a kick. You don't have time to lift up your
Too
leg.
close for comfort.
All right. So what do we normally do? Well, when we're putting pressure on someone and hopefully driving them back and they try to lift their leg to kick, I mean, we're just going to storm in and run them over. So, I mean, the way to stop a subsequent kick once you've engaged in the fight is just to keep constant pressure. If they're being pressured, they can't raise their leg to kick you, right? Or if they do, it's not going to have much on it, right? But for the intermediate students or advanced students, if you're in contact with your partner's arms and they try to give you a kick, you can do a jutsao or a snap down, right? To make them basically lose their balance the way the moment they're standing on one leg and then you jut and snap them down and then you go that way because you have contact, right? But the problem is that they'll only do that if they have contact with the partner's arms, because if their arms are not in contact, they'll just punch, which is what they're supposed to do.
Right.
So then for the constraints, you say, okay, the bad guy is going to come in with an attack, all right? And then when the Wing Chun guy starts doing the chain punches, the bad guy is going to stick and smother the Wing Chun person's arms and then give them a kick. So then the Wing Chun person has to use the jutsao because their arms are in contact, right?
All right.
Or maybe in the next one, I say, okay, no contact with the partner's arms and just give them a kick and they're going to have to step in and punch. So you put a little bit of a constraint on the exercise so that they have to use a certain segment of techniques, right? Because if you let them do whatever they want, they're just going to do the ones that they feel more comfortable in, right? But sometimes in order to develop a certain technique, you have to set up the situation. As stupid as it is to have your hands down when someone is in front of you talking shit, you still do also need to train this situation. Okay.
Yeah.
So of course, classical Wing Chun, we use the traditional zhong sao. The assumption is when I have my zhong sao like this, I'm very aggressively monitoring the distance between me and my opponent. If my opponent crosses the magnetic zone, then, typical Wing Chun ideas that we go in, right? But if my opponent's already in my face at the bar, I cannot put my hands up like this in a narrow position. Just
not
give me a hook
happening.
and knock me out, right? So then we use maybe like a fence, all right, where we have our hands kind of matching where their hands are, trying to talk them down, verbal de-escalation, yada, yada, yada. And if you can avoid the fight, great. And if you can't, you're just basically in a de-escalating kind of body posture, but you can do all your Wing Chun from there if you need to,
Mhm.
right? So, usually from like a self-defense perspective, we don't use the zhong sao, we use the fence, right?
Mm.
And certainly you don't want to be standing there with your hands down when someone is screaming in your face, talking shit, because if they suddenly fire a punch, it's game over, right?
Right.
But if we want students to learn late defenses, all right, like when they're caught off guard or they're in a slightly bladed position, a bad position, like some of the stuff from BJJ, you have to intentionally start in non-optimized position. All right. Most
yeah.
martial arts always talk about you got to keep your hands here, protect your face, you got to stand this way to be optimally balanced for this or that or whatever. And all that stuff is great, whether we're talking from a Wing Chun standpoint or kickboxing standpoint. But when you're talking about self-defense, you also need to practice from compromised position. Like, I know it sounds kind of kooky and weird, but like, every once in a while, you should
No.
think about like, what if you're sitting down
You're not in an ideal
and
position.
you're
yeah.
on the subway and someone
Yeah.
comes at you? How do you send your hands and feet forward when you're sitting down? All right. You got to kick a certain target on the knee. You got to send the hands forward. But it's the same Wing Chun, but you have to adapt it to different situations, right?
Right.
But if you knew that guy was going to attack you in advance, you would have stood up and put your hands up, right? You wouldn't intentionally have sat down and waited for the guy to attack you.
Oh, God.
All right. But if you want to develop the skill of that situation, you have to force yourself to start in a bad position, right? And that's also, I believe, what they mean by like constraints. You know what I mean? Like, okay,
Gotcha.
like you're only allowed to use certain techniques to defend it. You're only allowed to do it with certain setups, or you're only allowed to start in this position.
Mhm.
You're already sideways.
The worst off position.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's why, we do it like a couple times a month. Whether in the intermediate class or the advanced class, when we do sparring at the end of class, I'll tell the students, all right, go ahead and put your gloves on, elbows, all that stuff. Okay, today, start with your hands down. And I want you to start in a non-fighting position. Just kind of standing there,
Yeah.
maybe leaning on one leg like you're leaning against a lamppost. maybe-
looking at your phone.
Yeah, maybe your arms crossed or something like that, right?
Mhm.
And then your partner's not always coming up directly to you. Maybe they come off a little bit to the side. And then they're going to, be out of distance. Because if they're in distance staring at you, at some point you need to go like, yo, what's up?
Mm.
But from out of distance, from these different positions, they're going to suddenly attack you with a punch, with a kick, with something. And then you have to, from hands down, hand on your chin, wherever you are, react to that position, right? Now, would I ever advocate a student start with their hands down if they feel threatened? No. But the point is, what if you don't know this guy's going to attack? You're just on the subway, that guy's over there, right? And then suddenly lunges at you, all right?
Yeah.
So you need to like develop, okay, how do I send my hands forward from this weird position? If I'm squared, I know how to do it, but if I'm sideways, how can I do it, right? So that's also like a type of constraint, right? So by kind of forcing a certain setup, right? And
Got it.
and then of course things like the add-ons and stuff like that, though, that adds to like unpredictability and all that kind of stuff, right? And so it's interesting that this is like kind of the new thing, because I think a lot of good coaches have probably been doing something like this before. So like in jiu-jitsu, they kind of gamify it where it's like, okay, you can, maybe you're in the guard, but everything you have to do has to be like a collar choke or whatever. So you're only going for one thing, right? Or maybe you have to go for arm locks, but you have to start with collar grips first before you can go to arm locks, right? So they're creating like a certain framework, right? And this is really easy to do in Wing Chun, where we can, look, for Wing Chun instructors out there, okay, if you want to create a kind of ecological dynamics for, your school, all right, obviously you can listen to what I had just explained over the course of the last hour or so, right? But there's a real easy template. So the first thing is, when you give them a sparring or interactive exercise, you got to give them a place to start. Okay.
All right.
So for this exercise, are you starting in classical Wing Chun Zhongzhou? Are you starting in hands up like a self-defense frame? Are you starting from hands down?
Mhm.
What is the starting position? Okay. 2, what are the opening attacks that the attacker does? All right. Are they just getting too close? Are they actually coming with a punch or a kick?
Yes.
What is the defense, right? And then the third question should be, then what happens? Or what is the outcome? So sometimes you can even gamify. For the senior students, I do this. I say, okay, when you're you do Chi sparring or Wing Chun versus non-Wing Chun sparring. And then I say, when your partner starts pressing you, bring them to the floor. So I don't even say like a specific technique, like use Kamnasao or use a Mangang Sao, neck pull or whatever. I say, all right, when your partner starts pressing you, using position sweep, the neck pulling hand, cow gurk, the subti toy, getting behind them, whatever method, I don't care. But now we give them an objective. The objective is to put them on the floor.
Bring them down.
Okay. So you have a starting position. For example, you say, okay, Wing Chun person is in classical Wing Chun. Attacker is going to be in non-Wing Chun. What is the attack? If they're senior, it's not as limited. If they're junior, it's like 1 or 2 different attacks. If they're senior, it's like, okay, whatever. And then unless I want specifically to work on something, so I would say, okay, attacker starts with the hands up. Wing Chun person starts in Zhongzhou. The attacker is going to do any kind of punching attack. No kicks today, just for some parameter. And then after that, the Wing Chun trainee is going to go in. They're going to do their defense. And then the bad guy is going to start like kind of bullying with their upper body, pressing through and trying to put weight on them. And the Wing Chun trainee has to, take their side, take their back, and bring them to the floor. And for the advanced seniors, they have a bunch of different methods they can do it. And that is games with constraints and variables. So I'm not telling them it's this punch and you do this move, and then you do this move, and then you do this move to go to the ground.
Goal.
You give them the goal, and then you give them a framework. And then what happens is they start to learn how to make their Wing Chun work in the framework of the situations that are going to happen in fighting. And this is the problem with the traditional method of here's the technique, here's the application, okay, good luck. Because the problem with that method is that the Wing Chun trainee learns this example and then only sees that example as the only way that technique can be done. And then when they're fighting, the Wing Chun trainee is looking for that moment to do that technique. And this, I think, is the reason why some of the more modern day Wing Chun practitioners are struggling applying their Wing Chun against other people. Because in my opinion, the core concepts are not being taught. The core concepts like adaptability and change and stick and all this kind of stuff. And instead, because like on YouTube, what do you get on YouTube? You get techniques. You see Wing Chun guys on YouTube, and what are they showing? Okay, well, if he does this punch, you do this move. And if there's a second punch, then you do this one. So you go 1 and then 2. And then the student is waiting to see an opponent that goes 1, 2. And then they can do this. All right. But then when their opponent goes 1 and then punches with a hook with the same hand, they're there and they're trying to make that move work. And that's not the situation, right? So then what you do, you then have to create another technique for that situation, right? So then the problem is the student starts to learn Wing Chun by collecting moves and then hoping that under the stress and pressure of a real fighting situation, they'll pick the right one. So when you are in amygdala hijack, stressed and pressured, that's the moment when you're suddenly going to know, oh yeah, well, I do the bongs out the first one, tan down the second one, right? No, you're all going to be in system 1 fast thinking, not in this like, system 2, we can think about it kind of thing, right? So if you change the idea for the interactive sparring practice to outcome based, okay? So you say, all right, you're going to close the gap when someone attacks you with a punch, and your job is through your chain punches, let's say for a beginner, and your steps to keep constant pressure that's destabilizing to your opponent.
Okay.
All right. So that if they try to punch you with the other hand, it should be difficult because they're fighting for their balance. So now what you're doing is you're not telling the student, if a second punch comes in, do tanda. But if it's on the inside, you got to do bong. But if it goes low, you got to do this. And then now they have a laundry list. And then when that other punch comes, they go, ugh, because they're trying to figure out which is the move I'm supposed to do because they're not taught function. All right. The guy tries to punch, and this is just one example, destabilize him by punching in that moment that he punches, or smother the arms with your own arms so that they can't punch you with the second arm. Or try so another outcome, try to turn your partner so their center line is facing the other way, and that keeps you from the other one. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to prevent that the opponent can punch us with the other hand. How do we do it? Destabilizing pressure, smothering and sticking, or literally turning our opponent to face the other way. In Wing Chun, that's like about the only three things you can do besides just knocking him out or taking him to the ground or kicking him and he can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
But like once the fight is already going, you defended the initial punch. How do we stop the second punch? Okay, we stop it through pressure, destabilization, sticking, pinning, all right? Or quite literally smothering the arms, like in a way that those second and third punches can't come in, or just positional controls. I position my partner in a way where he or she cannot physically launch another punch, turning them.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have three different ways to avoid the second punch. So then you gamify it. Okay, today we're going to prevent the second punch with overwhelming pressure and stick and smothering. The next time, okay, you're going to be on sticking to his arms, not letting him go in. And the third one is going to be like, okay, while you're exchanging, you're going to try to turn your partner to face the other way so that their center line isn't on you, right? And that's how you learn. So then what you're doing is you're not trying to apply a move in combat. You're trying to apply an idea.
Yeah.
All right. Constant pressure is an idea. How you do that is up to you. Sticking and smothering with the arms is also an idea. Okay. Turning your partner away from you is an idea. And what you find is when you teach the student that idea, try to apply that and you make it playful and you turn it into a game,
They pick it up.
Not only do they pick it up, but the techniques to do that will start to come out.
Flow out.
Because they're not trying to apply a technique. They're trying to apply an idea. And the technique is just the means to do it. But if they're trying to apply a technique, it's like they're trying to put this square thing in the square peg in the round opening, right?
Yeah.
And they're forcing it. All right. But if they learn how to or what they're trying to do, then the technique they need will come out with proper guidance, right? And that's why you really have to gamify it. And I'm glad that that's becoming a thing in jiu-jitsu. And we've been doing it in our school. And I hope that people who are instructors kind of take a little bit of this as some inspiration to maybe gamify things, add some variables, focus more on concepts and ideas, and not just techniques. And technique is wrong. And no, you can't do it this way. It's got to be this way, this way, this way. Give them an idea of what they're trying to do. What is the outcome? All right. And then everything else should fall into place. And that's all I got to say about that. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius, hit that bell for notifications, support us on Patreon and YouTube with memberships, or just simply send us a donation via PayPal in the description below. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.
All right, here we go. We ready? We good to go, Dreidel? All right, let's go. I got shit I gotta get.
He's got shit to do.
Yeah, shit.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering a question from one of our Patreons. Lots of gems, lots of ecological dynamics, lots of, are you using the twit method?
Well played.
Yeah, wrapped in plastic.